All citizens deserve equal protection under the law. This is one of our most basic values. It's an essential tenet of any healthy democracy. We know that protection under the law is often not doled out equally across neighborhoods and ethnicities. But almost all of us can agree that equal protection under the law should be applied to everyone equally. You all deserve a fair shot at living your lives peacefully, safely, and free of crime. Yet, victims of covert harassment crimes don't just get unequal protection under the law, they get absolutely no protection under the law. You just heard about covert harassment crimes from Ella Free. You can read more about the two modes of crimes that make up covert harassment in our flyer, which we've been passing out today. I don't want to get into the weeds about exactly what's involved in these modern crimes. The intimidating watching and voyeurism involved in organized stalking, the multi-stalker stalking, the cell phone apps and cell phone hacking that offenders use to track and silently mob their victims in public, the harassing behavior from groups of offenders who clearly act as coordinated teams of stalkers, the vandalism, and even the repeated home break-ins that some victims of organized stalking experience over and over again. I don't want to linger on all the details of electronic harassment, the repeated molestation with improvised microwave weapons, the assault and battery with black market directed energy devices, some of them very sophisticated and powerful, which are capable of causing high-pitched ringing in the ears, tremendous pains, and even permanent damage to the ears and brain, among other injuries. I could stand here for days telling you about how covert harassment has tortured so many people, destroyed so many lives, been a mode of cruelty to animals, and terrorized and grievously harmed innocent children, disabled persons, veterans, the elderly, people in the prime of their lives, and so many others. Instead of those details, I am compelled to share a few key points. One point is how hard it is for non-victims to believe that these crimes are happening, or are even possible. Keep in mind that by their very nature, covert harassment crimes are intentionally designed to be undetectable by bystanders, practically undetectable, while being painfully destructive to the targeted victims. For all our safety, the general public needs to be aware that many thousands of people all over the world are speaking out about being victimized by organized stalking and electronic harassment. Small rallies happened in a number of cities around the world exactly 1 year ago today, on the first annual Global Targeted Individual Awareness Day. A larger set of rallies happened just 4 months ago, and today is the second annual Global Targeted Individual Awareness Day. Protests just like this one are happening in Austin, Chicago, Cleveland, Denver, Lexington, Kentucky, New York City, Orlando, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Pueblo, Colorado, Sacramento, St. Paul, Minnesota, Spartanburg, South Carolina, and Venice Beach, California. On this second annual Targeted Individual Awareness Day, protests with a message just like ours are happening in Australia, France, India, Italy, Japan, Kenya, Ngong, Kenya, outside of Nairobi, Morocco, New Zealand, Poland, Russia, Spain, South Korea, Thailand, the United Kingdom, and Vietnam. Soon it's going to become uncomfortably obvious to the general public that a growing number of people are speaking out about how they've been victimized by organized stalking and electronic harassment. The growing number of voices should be a strong wake-up call that there's a genuine criminal issue underlying our allegations. If this isn't convincing enough, published U.S. Department of Justice statistics, UK Home Office statistics, and Canadian government statistics all show the same thing. 1 in 8 stalking victims in those countries allege being stalked by more than one offender simultaneously. There are also, as Ella said, the well-publicized cases of organized stalking in mainstream media reports. She mentioned Harvey Weinstein, who hired Black Cube, a private investigative firm, to harass his sexual assault victims and reporters by proxy. That means he had other people do it for him. He paid them in an attempt to silence them about his crimes. The Church of Scientology is notorious for using sophisticated stalking and harassment campaigns to silence its victims. While the details of anyone's victimization by covert harassment can seem murky and unsubstantiated, without the evidence collecting work of law enforcement, that is, the big picture makes it abundantly clear that there's a genuine criminal issue going on. However, when victims attempt to report covert harassment crimes to law enforcement, they're ignored. Sometimes they're mocked by the peace officers who are sworn to serve and protect. Any peace officers out here listening, I hope you can listen well, because we need you to start tackling these crimes. Sometimes police tell the victims, it's above our pay grade. Go talk to the FBI. When victims go to the FBI, they're told that city police are the appropriate first-line responders for local crimes, which they are. Then, when victims go back to local police, they run the risk of being detained on psychiatric holds, simply for alleging harassment and abuse at the hands of a criminal harassment network. It's a complete runaround that makes the vast majority of victims too afraid to speak out. This is what's called institutional betrayal. And this form of institutional betrayal by those sworn to serve and protect has given the public the false impression that covert harassment is a non-issue. This disturbing situation is reminiscent of the way that victims of child sexual abuse and on-campus sexual assault used to be treated. And now we all accept that child sexual abuse and sexual violence against women are widespread crimes. And just like we don't want those disgusting crimes in our community, we also don't want multi-stalker stalking by criminal harassment networks destroying lives and threatening public safety in our communities. It's even easier for people to dismiss the possibility of assaults with directed energy devices and microwave weapons, and we do understand that because we remember the time from when before we were targeted. But if you drill down into this issue, into this topic, you'll see that it's a genuine criminal issue that authorities refuse to address because they're too ill-informed, ill-prepared, or afraid to take on this 21st century crime. The disturbing energy weapon assaults on dozens of U.S. diplomats and some of their family members in Cuba and China are well documented in the mainstream media. At this point, there's no covering them up or denying that some type of high-tech assault took place. If you read the reports of the medical doctors who treated those individuals, you'll see those individuals experienced acute physical pain, emotional trauma, and lasting physical injuries as a result of the high-tech assaults. The scientists and medical doctors with the greatest expertise in this area will tell you that most likely directional energy emitting devices, radio frequency devices, and microwave directed energy weapons were used in those assaults in Cuba and China. And in our fast-paced global world, it makes no sense at all that that should be limited to Cuba and China. According to publicly available lectures from the real experts in this area, there are COTS devices, commercial off-the-shelf devices. Let me say that again, commercial off-the-shelf devices that can produce exposures approaching those required to inflict the injuries diagnosed in the assaulted diplomats. With a little know-how and tinkering, those commercial off-the-shelf devices can be amped up and modified to increase their power level and beam focusing capabilities of these improvised directed energy weapons. Now, I'm sure many of you know that the military, the U.S. military, has been developing so-called less lethal anti-personnel electromagnetic weapons for many years, for decades in fact. It's more than reasonable to assume that there's already a black market for miniaturized versions of these weapons, of these energy weapons, available for purchase on the darknet. The widespread nature of this problem becomes abundantly clear when you realize that thousands of victims had already alleged energy weapon assaults long before the diplomats were assaulted in Cuba and China. And the victims who previously reported those attacks and spoke out about them described effects just like the ones reported by the diplomats. The reason you don't know about all these previously reporting crimes and victims is that law enforcement slammed the door on their allegations, foregoing many opportunities and law enforcement's obligation to get ahead of these crimes and keep our communities safe. Let's think about motive. People in the general public who hear talk of covert harassment often get stuck trying to understand motive. They say, sure, there might have been geopolitical motives for representatives of our government to be attacked in Cuba and China, but why would ordinary people like you be subjected to high-tech harassment and assaults? It's important to understand that what's going on with these crimes is not one single giant criminal conspiracy. Instead, there are a large number of independent organized crime groups that have adopted similar playbooks for covert harassment, that have independently acquired the manuals for building improvised directed energy weapons, or have independently purchased these weapons from an underground black market. Because many different harassment networks are perpetrating these crimes, the motives vary a lot from case to case. But if you take some time to actually listen to the reporting victims, you'll hear allegations pointing to motives that do make a lot of sense. Sometimes it looks like harassment for hire is used for vendettas or revenge. Other times, multi-stalker stalking emerges from the more traditional single-stalker stalking by wealthy individuals with sexual motives. We also hear from victims who experience brutal electronic harassment on a daily basis as a way of evicting them from rent-controlled properties, so the landlords can jack up the rent and make more money. Some individuals, like myself, witnessed criminal activity and say they're going to report it. Covert harassment is then used to coerce those individuals into silence or run them out of town. Admittedly, a large proportion of individuals don't know their assailants and are totally perplexed about the reason for their targeting. In these cases, it looks like people are being randomly targeted for some kind of sick game or sadistic sport. And if you find that hard to believe, I suggest you pay attention to the news, because not a week will go by before you see that our world is full of sick crimes and motives that don't make any sense. Plus, it's not the job of the reporting victims to determine motive and put together a complete dossier for the district attorney. That's what we pay law enforcement to do. Even though the motives behind organized stalking and electronic harassment can be difficult to understand, there's a core motive that's common to all cases of covert harassment. The criminals perpetrate these crimes because they know they can get away with it without any interference from law enforcement. The opportunity for perpetrators to act with complete impunity is the unifying motive behind all covert harassment crimes. And that is 100% the fault of law enforcement, because they're not doing their job when it comes to this issue. And that includes the police force right here in Portland, Oregon. Now, this is important. I want you guys to consider this carefully. Inaction by law enforcement is not just allowing a trivial form of harassment to infest our communities. Stalking by individuals or groups of individuals is a crime in every state. Highly organized stalking against a singled out individual is a very serious crime. In many ways, it's as serious as the crimes for which federal statutes were erected to counteract the Ku Klux Klan's terrorizing activities. Directed energy weapons take it to the next level because physical pain is violence. To inflict extreme physical pain on someone by means of a focused energy-emitting device is a violent crime, even when it doesn't leave visible signs of injury. To repeatedly inflict pain on someone this way, day after day, night after night, counts as torture. Bona fide torture with a capital T. Physical assaults capable of causing permanent damage to people's ears, organs of balance, and brain tissue count as violent assault and battery, even when these assaults are done from a distance or through people's walls by means of focused, wall-penetrating microwave energy. Now, that's the kind of crime that police are allowing to grow in our communities through their nonchalance and dereliction of duty. They act like they forget that all tax-paying citizens deserve equal protection under the law. Even if the crimes in question are new on the scene and challenge traditional methods of law enforcement. Offenders firing improvised microwave weapons at people in our communities are acting like terrorists, and they should be treated like domestic terrorists. Covert harassment is real. It's here in Portland. It's in Salem, Eugene, and Bend, Oregon. It's in Vancouver, Washington, Seattle, and Spokane. It's in Vancouver, Canada. We hear reports from Victoria, Canada, Kelowna, and the Sunshine Coast. It's happening in many other cities and towns across the Pacific Northwest and the rest of the world. Covert harassment can infiltrate any neighborhood and harm a person of any gender, age, or ethnicity. It can destroy families. It can ruin lives. We're not just standing up for ourselves and other victims of organized stalking and violent assaults with microwave weapons. We're also standing up for public safety and everyone's lives. I want to leave you with this final message. Regardless of political affiliation, nobody deserves your vote unless their platform includes a strong stance for public safety. This applies to candidates running for office at national, state, and local levels, including the mayor of Portland, members of Portland City Council, and local sheriffs, especially the sheriffs. Let us all remember that criminals are always among the first in society to adopt new technologies. With the rapid growth of technology in this day and age, we ask you to demand that all candidates for office have a public safety platform that explicitly includes emerging technologies. Directed energy devices and microwave weapons are here to stay, and we need to start dealing with them openly. Criminals are already using these weapons. These weapons need to be openly addressed as an emerging technology of concern by the people we put in office. And so you should demand this for the victims whose lives have been shattered by these weapons. Demand it for yourself. Demand it for your children and friends. And demand it for the prosperity and safety of your community. We all know that fear of criminal prosecution is the only thing that's going to stop the growth of organized stalking and electronic harassment. As long as there is silence around these crimes, the crimes are guaranteed to keep growing. And so we're going to keep making noise until we see equal protection under the law for victims of covert harassment. Enough is enough. We are FFTI, Freedom for Targeted Individuals. We are the Alliance to End Targeting. And we demand justice for the victims of covert harassment. Thank you.